Episode 2 of The Portrait of Dorian Gray, also known as The Picture of Dorian Gray. I prefer portrait personally. I like the way it sounds.
I do too.
The title of the book that I have in my hands is The Picture of Dorian Gray.
Okay.
So, Chapter 2, technically Episode 3.
Maybe.
We'll see. It might be Episode 2. We don't know yet. It may, for some random-ass reason, because we're really bad at this right now, be Episode 1. And if that's the case, sorry, you might want to wait for the first chapter of the book.
We're sorry, we suck.
I'm Kit Kinetic.
I'm Rett the Best.
And we're really new at this.
We are reading a book while drinking tea.
Yep.
Which is the entire premise of this show.
Uh-huh. The tea I have beside my elbow is a double bergamot Earl Gray. What are you drinking?
Havana Earl Grey cream.
Ah, mine's from Stash. I'm kind of being a normie and drinking a bagged tea because I didn't bring the loose leaf with me.
This stuff is kind of loose leaf, kind of bagged. It's like a little bit of leaf in oversized bags.
Oh, okay. So it gives it room for the actual leaf to unfurl and do its thing.
Yeah. I am also being incredibly snotty. I really am. I have cucumber sandwiches. I have a lamb yarrow I sliced up.
Where did you get it from? Because I thought you were working out of the Necro Nom Nom Nom.
I was.
How'd it turn out?
It would have been better if I wasn't the one making it.
Oh, yeah, that can be a thing.
Right?
Which, by the way, if you haven't had a cucumber sandwich, I really recommend you try it. They're actually very good.
They are.
They sound so bland, but there's a really nice complementary flavor to them.
Yeah, I think most of it is the mixture. The cream cheese mixture that you put on it?
Yeah. We should probably get back to the picture of Dorian Gray. Torian.
Dorian, that's a nice name.
Yeah, actually.
I like it, Dorian.
In Chapter 2, we get to meet Dorian.
Yeah. Are you excited?
I'm not gay, so no.
Are you intrigued at the concept of meeting Dorian Gray?
Yes.
And it turns out, like, the picture of Dorian Gray is a giant love story so far.
Uh-huh. Which I should probably correct the previous statement. I am not gay, but Dorian is a man.
Yes. You're also not a sexual person.
This is true. When it comes down to it, my asexual ass is just not sexually interested in people.
Because I have this beautiful snotty spread before me.
And if you're interested in our weird kitchen creations, you may get to see some of that maybe one of these days on Rhett's YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Let us know if you are interested in it.
Yes. But speaking of YouTube channels, I'm going to do a slideshow of various pictures and stuff that are actually related to the book.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second. I think that would probably be better suited to Lit Bits. Because there are no pictures with this book.
Yeah, but there's like pictures of the flowers that they mention.
Yeah.
And the umlaut, because we have a nice conversation about an umlaut that I decided to leave in.
Yeah. But with Lit Bits, you get a dictionary definition, you get a fairy tale and mythology, so there's lots of imagery to go with that.
Pictures of cows.
Moo. Shall we try Chapter 2?
Try to what Chapter 2?
Read it.
Oh, okay.
All right. Chapter 2. Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray.
Not the portrait.
Should be the portrait.
Portrait sounds better. And it is a portrait, not a picture. There's no camera involved.
Exactly. Chapter 2. Do we remember what happened in Chapter 1?
Henry and Basil were talking about Dorian Gray. and how Basil is not going to display the portrait he made of Dorian Gray because he put too much of himself in it. And Henry is in an unhealthy and dishonest relationship with his wife, and he thinks it's a good thing. And Basil doesn't want Henry to meet Dorian because he thinks Henry will try to influence Dorian, and the way Dorian is inspiring to Basil, and Basil's totally in love with Dorian.
Totally. I'm going to apologize right now for my drifting back and forth between Basil and Basil. It's a bad habit. I don't know how or why I ended up that way, but there you are.
That's okay with me. The main difference between portrait and picture is that the portrait is an artistic representation of one or more persons, and picture is an artifact that depicts or records visual perception. For this reason, in photography, a portrait is generally not a snapshot, but a composed image of a person in a still position. And that's according to AskDifference.com.
All right. Unfortunately, the Devil's Dictionary does not have a definition for portrait.
What about picture?
A very good question. There we go. Picture, according to the Devil's Dictionary. Noun, a representation in 2 dimensions of something wearisome in 3. Behold, great Daubert's picture here on view, taken from life. If that description's true, grant heavenly powers that I be taken too. By Jolly Hayne. The quote.
Okay.
So a representation in 2 dimensions of something wearisome in 3.
Okay. In 3 dimensions. Okay, got it.
Yep.
And people are wearisome.
Correct. Are we ready to start this chapter?
Maybe.
Okay. Chapter 2. As they entered, they saw Dorian Gray. He was seated at the piano with his back to them, turning over the pages of a volume of Schumann's Forest Scenes. Schumann was a romantic composer, and the piece of music was from 1848.
Okay.
You must lend me these, Basil, he cried. I want to learn them. They are perfectly charming. That entirely depends on how you sit today, Dorian. Oh, I'm tired of sitting, and I don't want a life-size portrait of myself, answered the lad, swinging around on the music stool in a willful, petulant manner. When he caught sight of Lord Henry, a faint blush colored his cheeks for a moment, and he started up. I beg your pardon, Basil, but I didn't know you had anyone with you. This is Lord Henry Wotton, Dorian, an old Oxford friend of mine. I've just been telling him what a capital sitter you were, and now you've spoiled everything. You have not spoiled my pleasure in meeting you, Mr. Gray, said Lord Henry, stepping forward and extending his hand. You were about to interject.
That little verbal exchange sounded like a couple of children to me. Very kind of childlike. Well, I wanted to do this, but you wouldn't let me. And, well, okay then.
Well, I think they're kind of promoting the fact that Dorian is a young man. And probably a little spoiled and vapid.
Right?
My aunt has often spoken to me about you. You are one of her favorites, and I am afraid one of her victims also. I am in Lady Agatha's black books at present, answered Dorian with a funny look of penitence. I promised to go to a club in Whitechapel with her last Tuesday, and I really forgot all about it. So, Whitechapel. People are pretty familiar with Whitechapel.
Yep, Jack the Ripper.
Exactly.
Question, though.
Mm-hmm.
When was the picture of Dorian Gray published?
It was published. It originally appeared in the July 1890 issue of Lippincott's monthly magazine.
What was it,
1890.
1890?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It was written while Jack the Ripper was still a thing, which was 1888 to 1891.
Yep. Which is probably why there is a footnote in here about it. In London, the East End district with a large immigrant population, home to many clubs for working-class men's improvement, and the site of the Jack the Ripper murders.
Yeah. So Dorian Gray and Mrs. What's-Her-Face, Agatha?
Lady Agatha.
Them going to Whitechapel when they're reasonably wealthy people feels like they're slumming it.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe playing with Jack the Ripper a bit.
Could very well be.
But then again, neither one of them are prostitutes that we know of, so they should be safe.
But there's also the theory that Jack the Ripper was a well-to-do man.
True. Maybe Dorian is Jack the Ripper?
Maybe. Question mark.
Bold question mark with an underline.
Maybe not, though, because he forgot to go to Whitechapel with Lady Agatha.
True. Well, he forgot to go with Lady Agatha. Maybe he did go to Whitechapel, but not with Lady Agatha.
Maybe he went with a medical kit. We were to have played a duet together. 3 duets, I believe. I don't know what she will say to me. I am far too frightened to call. And to call in this case means to visit.
Not to call on the phone.
Right. They had no telephone. And they weren't inclined to stand outside yelling at people. It just wasn't done.
Right. Maybe he would sing up to her balcony or something.
Perhaps. Oh, I will make your peace with my aunt. She is quite devoted to you. And I don't think it really matters about your not being there. The audience probably thought it was a duet when Aunt Agatha sits down to the piano. She makes quite enough noise for 2 people. God! Wait a minute, is Agatha the one who was compared to the peacock? I believe so. The esteem he has for his aunt. Goodness.
I have it open right here on Gutenberg.
Mm-hmm.
Lady Brandon.
Ah.
Not the same woman.
Okay. How many more times can they nag on women in this book?
Right?
That is very horrid to her and not very nice to me, answered Dorian, laughing. Henry looked at him. Yes, he was certainly wonderfully handsome. With his finely curved scarlet lips, his frank blue eyes, his crisp golden hair, there was something in his face that made one trust him at once. All the candor of youth was there, as well as all youth's passionate purity. One felt that he had kept himself unspotted from the world. Wilde's reference here is to the Bible, James 1:27. Pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to keep himself unspotted from the world. From the King James Version. No wonder Basil Hallward worshipped him. You are too charming to go in for philanthropy, Mr. Gray. Far too charming. And Lord Henry flung himself down on the divan and opened his cigarette case.
Chain smoker.
Yeah.
Don't smoke.
Right? It's not good for your lungs. It certainly won't help keep you youthful.
Yep.
The painter had been busy mixing his colors and getting his brushes ready. He was looking worried, and when he heard Lord Henry's last remark, he glanced at him, hesitated for a moment, and then said, Harry, I want to finish this picture today. Would you think it awfully rude of me if I asked you to go away? Lord Henry smiled and looked at Dorian Gray. Am I to go, Mr. Gray? He asked. Oh, please don't, Lord Henry. I see that Basil's in one of his sulky moods. I can't bear him when he sulks. Besides, I want you to tell me why I should not go in for philanthropy. I don't know that I should tell you that, Mr. Gray.
Dorian just seems like a big, whiny child to me.
Yeah. I would not want to be involved with that.
Right? I mean, I can see why Basil called him a lad.
Mm-hmm. He is very, very young and kind of spoiled acting.
Right?
And not too smart.
I don't like him.
Neither do I.
Maybe that's the point.
Yeah, it is so tedious a subject that one would have to talk seriously about it. But I certainly shall not run away, now that you have asked me to stop. You don't really mind Basil, do you? You've often told me that you liked your sitters to have someone to chat to. Hallward bit his lip. If Dorian wishes it, of course he must stay. Dorian's whims are laws to everybody except himself.
Okay, he's kind of enabling Dorian's assholishness.
Poor behaviors.
Yeah.
Lord Henry took up his hat and gloves. You are very pressing, Basil, but I'm afraid I must go. I've promised to meet a man at the Orleans, which is a small social club. Or was. Goodbye, Mr. Gray.
Oh, is New Orleans named after the social club, or is it named after something else?
I don't know. I'm going to assume there was probably an Orleans in some place, which prompted the new.
The Duke of Orleans.
Ah.
Felipe II of Orleans was regent of the Kingdom of France at the time. His title came from the French city of Orleans. Nueva Orleans, the name of New Orleans in Spanish, remains under Spanish control. Okay, so he was a French king, a French regent king, who named the city in Spanish, as it says Nueva Orleans is Spanish.
Goodbye, Mr. Gray. Come and see me some afternoon in Curzon Street, which is London's fashionable Mayfair neighborhood. Oh, Lord, I'm going to encounter a French word for pout.
You are?
I think so. Reading footnotes and such.
Oh.
I am nearly always at home at 5 o'clock. Write to me when you are coming. I should be sorry to miss you. Basil, cried Dorian Gray, if Lord Henry Wotton goes, I shall go too. You never open your lips while you're painting, and it's horribly dull standing on a platform and trying to look pleasant. Ask him to stay. I insist upon it. I can just envision this man-child stomping his foot.
Right? Ugh. And isn't he blonde?
Mm-hmm. Stay, Harry, to oblige Dorian and to oblige me, said Hallward, gazing intently at his picture. It is quite true. I never talk when I'm working, and never listen either. And it must be dreadfully tedious for my unfortunate sitters. I beg you to stay. But what about my man at the Orleans? The painter laughed. I don't think there'll be any difficulty about that. Sit down again, Harry. And now, Dorian, get up on the platform and don't move about too much, or pay any attention to what Lord Henry says. He has a very bad influence over all his friends, with the single exception of myself. The ego.
Right.
Can practically swim through the ego of these three guys.
So egocentric.
Dorian Gray stepped up on the dais with the air of a young Greek martyr and made a little moue of discontent, the French word for pout, to Lord Henry, to whom he had rather taken a fancy. Uh-oh. Are they going to catfight?
Probably.
That should be entertaining.
Is this going to be a love triangle book?
I don't know. If it is, people have really undersold this novel. He was so unlike Basil. They made a delightful contrast, and he had such a beautiful voice. After a few moments, he said to them, Have you really a very bad influence, Lord Henry? As Basil says, there's no such thing as a good influence, Mr. Gray. All influence is immoral. Immoral from the scientific point of view.
What is the scientific point of view of immoral?
I have no idea. Why? Because the influence of a person is to give him one's own soul. He does not think his natural thoughts or burn with his natural passions. His virtues are not real to him. His sins, if there are such things as sins, are borrowed. He becomes an echo of someone else's music, an actor of a part that has not been written for him. The aim of life is self-development. To realize one's nature perfectly, that is what each of us is here for. People are afraid of themselves nowadays. They have forgotten the highest of all duties, the duty that one owes to oneself. Of course, they're charitable. They feed the hungry and clothe the beggar, but their own souls starve and they're naked. Courage has gone out of our race. Perhaps we never really had it. The terror of society, which is the basis of morals, the terror of God, which is the secret of religion. These are the two things that govern us, and yet... Just turn your head a little more to the right, Dorian. Like a good boy, said the painter. Wow. Condescending.
Right?
Said the painter, deep in his work. And conscious, only that a look had come into the lad's face that he had never seen there before.
Maybe thought?
A rare thought rattling around in that skull.
Right?
And yet, continued Lord Henry in his low musical voice, and with that graceful wave of the hand that was always so characteristic of him, and that he had even in his Eton days, most fashionable English public, private, secondary school.
Okay. Public, private.
It says most fashionable English public that is private secondary school, which is kind of out of our realm of understanding as United States citizens.
Right.
And if that surprises anyone in the way I phrase that, it's because there are more Americans than just those living in the US.
Right.
So you rarely will find me saying American because Brazilians are Americans. They're South Americans.
And we're not Canadians.
Right. Canadians are Americans too.
So are Mexicans.
Yep.
And Argentinians.
Mm-hmm.
Or do they have a different name for themselves than Argentinians?
I don't know.
I'm sure they do in their own language, which is Spanish. But, I mean, Argentinians just sounds weird to me.
Yeah. So, yeah, there are more Americans than just those living in the United States. I believe that if one man were to live out his life fully and completely, were to give form to every feeling, expression to every thought, reality to every dream, I believe that the world would gain such a fresh impulse of joy that we would forget all the maladies and medievalism and return to the Hellenic ideal, which was relating to classical Greece, implying a respect for reason, civic responsibility, and other ideals, including love between men.
Nice. Very gay.
Yep.
Hellenic, Greece in Greek, is like Helena or something, named after Helen of Troy because it was the first time they united as a country against something.
Yeah.
And it was the Romans that named them Greek because they thought that they were all settlers from Graecia or something like that. I'm probably getting the words wrong. So it's like, oh, we find this community that speaks vaguely the same language as this other community. We're going to say that they're settlers from there. Oh, here's another country farther east, slightly different culture, slightly different emphasis on gods, same basic language. They're also settlers. Oh, there's like 26 others. They're all settlers from this one tiny little village.
Mm-hmm. To something finer, richer than the Hellenic ideal, it may be. But the bravest man among us is afraid of himself. The mutilation of the savage has its tragic survival in the self-denial that mars our lives. We are punished for our refusals. Every impulse that we strive to strangle broods in the mind and poisons us. The body sins once and has done with its sin, for action is a mode of purification. Nothing remains then but the recollection of a pleasure or the luxury of a regret. The only way to get rid of a temptation is to yield to it. Resist it, and your soul grows sick with the longing for the things it has forbidden to itself, with desire for what its monstrous laws have made monstrous and unlawful. It has been said that the great events of the world take place in the brain. It is in the brain, and the brain only, that the great sins of the world take place also. You, Mr. Gray, you yourself, with your rose-red youth and your rose-white boyhood, you have had passions that have made you afraid, thoughts that have filled you with terror, daydreams and sleeping dreams, whose mere memory might stain your cheek with shame. Stop!
Interesting theory of his, like a philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
If someone acts out what they think, that the world would be a better place. Mainly because all the irritating people would be dead.
Stop, you bewilder me, and I don't know what to say. There's some answer to you, but I cannot find it. Don't speak, let me think, or rather, let me try not to think.
Yes, because the lack of thought seems to be more his modus operandi, which I'm pretty sure I mispronounced.
Close enough. For nearly 10 minutes, he stood there, motionless, with parted lips and eyes strangely bright. He was dimly conscious that entirely fresh influences were at work within him, yet they seemed to him to have come really from himself. The few words that Basil's friend had said to him, words spoken by chance, no doubt, and with willful paradox in them, had touched some secret chord that had never been touched before.
It's called thought.
But that he felt was now vibrating and throbbing to curious pulses. Word choices. Music had stirred him like that. Music had troubled him many times. But music was not articulate. It was not a new world, but rather another chaos that it created in us. Words, mere words. How terrible they were. How clear and vivid and cruel. One could not escape from them, and yet what a subtle magic there was in them. They seemed to be able to give a plastic form to formless things, and to have a music of their own as sweet as that of a viol or of a lute. Mere words. Was there anything so real as words? Yes, there had been things in his boyhood that he had not understood. He understood them now. Life suddenly became fiery-colored to him. It seemed to him that he had been walking in fire. Why had he not known it? With his subtle smile, Lord Henry watched him. He knew the precise psychological moment when to say nothing. He felt intensely interested. He was amazed at the sudden impression that his words had produced. And, remembering a book that he had read when he was 16, a book which had revealed to him much that he had not known before, he wondered whether Dorian Gray was passing through a similar experience. He had merely shot an arrow into the air. Had it hit the mark? How fascinating the lad was.
I'm kind of wondering about Henry's motives.
I think Henry just likes to stir the fucking pot.
That could be it. But, is he trying just to stir the pot to see what will happen? Is he trying to change him in order to irritate Basil? Does he see something in Dorian he does not like and is trying to change Dorian so that part of him might change?
And in the change of Dorian, upset Basil.
Yeah. Or is it just kind of like a psychological experiment to him? Like, if I take this vapid person and put a thought in their head, what will happen?
I don't know. I guess we continue reading and find out.
Right?
And if it is not answered within this book, I will be incredibly frustrated.
Right?
Hallward painted away with that marvelous bold touch of his that had the true refinement and perfect delicacy that in art, at any rate, comes only from strength. He was unconscious of the silence. Basil, I'm tired of standing, cried Dorian Gray suddenly. I must go out and sit in the garden. The air is stifling here. My dear fellow, I'm so sorry. When I'm painting, I can't think of anything else, but you never sat better. You are perfectly still, and I have caught the effect I wanted. The half-parted lips and the bright look in the eyes. I don't know what Harry has been saying to you, but he has certainly made you have the most wonderful expression. I suppose he's been paying you compliments. You mustn't believe a word that he says. He has certainly not been paying me compliments. Perhaps that's the reason I don't believe anything he has told me.
Wow, narcissism.
You know you believe it all, said Lord Henry, looking at him with his dreamy, languorous eyes. Oh my God, 1800 and the word dreamy is in there. Did they update the language?
I don't know, but dreamy romance.
Yep, dreamy, languorous eyes. Wow. I will go out to the garden with you. It is horribly hot in the studio. Basil, let us have something iced to drink, something with strawberries in it.
Okay, the word dreamy was really popular in the 1850s.
Mm-hmm.
And slowly went down, and it is as popular now as it was in 1900. Whether or not that's the same definition,
I imagine it's not.
Of a person not practical, given to daydreaming, delightful or gorgeous is informal, having a magical or pleasantly unreal quality.
It's probably that. Certainly, Harry, just touch the bell, and when Parker comes, I will tell him what you want. I have got to work up this background, so I will join you later on. Don't keep Dorian too long. I have never been in better form for painting than I am today. This is going to be my masterpiece. It is my masterpiece as it stands. Lord Henry went out into the garden and found Dorian Gray burying his face in the great cool lilac blossoms, feverishly drinking in their perfume as if it had been wine. He came close to him and put his hand upon his shoulder. You are quite right to do that, he murmured. Nothing can cure the soul but the senses, just as nothing can cure the senses but the soul. The lad started and drew back. He was bareheaded, and the leaves had tossed his rebellious curls and tangled all their gilded threads. There was a look of fear in his eyes, such as people have when they are suddenly awakened. His finely chiseled nostrils quivered, and some hidden nerve shook the scarlet of his lips and left them trembling.
Scarlet lips.
I'm sorry, but the way they have described Dorian in that paragraph makes me think he's a horse.
I can see that, but some of the wording that they just used to describe him seems feminine to me in modern things, like scarlet lips.
Yeah.
Scarlet trembling lips.
But the quivering nostrils is totally equine.
Right? In my head, he looks like a blonde, feminine
Horse. Poor Dorian.
The author is gay. We know this. And it's like it makes sense. He's writing Dorian like a modern male writer would write a woman.
Mm-hmm. Yes, continued Lord Henry, that is one of the great secrets of life, to cure the soul by means of the senses, and the senses by means of the soul. You are a wonderful creation. You know more than you think you know, just as you know less than you want to know. Dorian Gray frowned and turned his head away. He could not help liking the tall, graceful young man who was standing by him. His romantic, olive-colored face and worn expression interested him. There was something in his low, languid voice that was absolutely fascinating. Cool, white, flower-like hands even had a curious charm. They moved, as he spoke, like music, and seemed to have a language of their own. But he felt afraid of him, and ashamed of being afraid. Why had it been left for a stranger to reveal him to himself? He had known Basil Hallward for months, but the friendship between them had never altered him. Suddenly there had come someone across his life who seemed to have disclosed to him life's mystery. And yet, what was there to be afraid of? He was not a schoolboy or a girl. It was absurd to be frightened. Let us go in and sit in the shade, said Lord Henry. Parker has brought out the drinks, and if you stay any longer in this glare, you will be quite spoiled, and Basil will never paint you again. You really must not allow yourself to become sunburnt. It would be unbecoming.
Okay, so I am unbecoming every summer when I get sunburned?
Well, certainly. Didn't you know you're supposed to apply lead to yourself?
True.
What can it matter? Cried Dorian Gray, laughing as he sat down on the seat at the end of the garden. It should matter everything to you, Mr. Gray. Why? Because you have the most marvelous youth, and youth is the one thing worth having. I don't feel that, Lord Henry. No, you don't feel it now. Some day, when you're old and wrinkled and ugly, when thought has seared your forehead with its lines and passion branded your lips with its hideous fires, you will feel it. You will feel it terribly. Now, wherever you go, you charm the world. Will it always be so? You have a wonderfully beautiful face, Mr. Gray. Don't frown.
Dorian described Henry as young, but Henry is talking like he's old. Is he a bit envious of Dorian's face?
Probably. It sounds like Dorian is envious of Henry's age.
But it says he could not help liking the tall, graceful young man who was standing by him. His romantic, olive-colored face and worn expression interest him. Dorian sees Henry as young and worn.
Ennui was a thing back then.
Yeah.
You have, and beauty is a form of genius. It is higher, indeed, than genius, as it needs no explanation. It is of the great facts of the world, like sunlight or springtime, or the reflection in dark waters of that silver shell we call the moon. It cannot be questioned. It has its divine right of sovereignty. It makes princes of those who have it. You smile? Ah, when you have lost it, you won't smile. People say sometimes that beauty is only superficial. That may be so, but at least it is not so superficial as thought is. To me, beauty is the wonder of wonders. It is only shallow people who do not judge by appearances.
That's like the opposite of the definition of shallow.
Yep. The true mystery of the world is the visible, not the invisible. Yes, Mr. Gray, the gods have been good to you, but what the gods give, they quickly take away. You have only a few years in which to live really, perfectly, and fully. When your youth goes, your beauty will go with it. And then you will suddenly discover that there are no triumphs left for you, or have to content yourself with those mean triumphs that the memory of your past will make more bitter than defeats.
Mean, of course, meaning average in this context.
Yep. Although, judging by each one of these guys' temperament, it could very well mean mean.
Right? Mean as in not nice.
Cruel. Every month, as it wanes, brings you nearer to something dreadful. Time is jealous of you, and wars against your lilies and your roses. You will become sallow, and hollow-cheeked, and dull-eyed. You will suffer horribly. Realize your youth while you have it. Don't squander the gold of your days, listening to the tedious trying to improve the hopeless failure, or giving away your life to the ignorant, the common, and the vulgar. These are the sickly aims, the false ideals of our age. Live the wonderful life that is in you. Let nothing be lost upon you. Be always searching for new sensations. Be afraid of nothing. A new hedonism. That is what our century wants. You might be its visible symbol. With your personality, there is nothing you could not do. The world belongs to you for a season. The moment I met you, I saw that you were quite unconscious of what you really are, of what you really might be. There was so much in you that charmed me that I felt that I must tell you something about yourself. I thought how tragic it would be if you were wasted, for there is such a little time that your youth will last, such a little time. The common hill flowers wither, but they blossom again. The laburnum will be as yellow next June as it is now. In a month, there will be purple stars on the clematis, more flowers. It's a large flowering vine. And year after year, the green night of its leaves will hold its purple stars. But we never get back our youth. The pulse of joy that beats in us at 20 becomes sluggish. Our limbs fail, our senses rot. We degenerate into hideous puppets, haunted by the memory of the passions of which we were too much afraid, and the exquisite temptations that we had not the courage to yield to. Youth, youth, there is absolutely nothing in the world but youth. Dorian Gray listened, open-eyed and wondering. The spray of lilac fell from his hand upon the gravel. A furry bee came and buzzed around it for a moment. Then it began to scramble all over the oval, stellated globe of the tiny blossoms. So, star-shaped. There's a new word to add to my vocabulary.
What, star-shaped?
Stellated, meaning star-shaped.
Oh, stellated. I've seen it before, but I never knew what it meant.
He watched it with that strange interest in trivial things that we try to develop when things of high import make us afraid, or when we are stirred by some new emotion for which we cannot find expression, or when some thought that terrifies us lays sudden siege to the brain and calls on us to yield. After a time, the bee flew away. He saw it creeping into the stained trumpet of a Tyrian convolvulus. It's a morning glory vine. Really? They had to use that for morning glory?
Convolvulus. See what a dictionary actually says. Genus that a morning glory is in.
Well, either way, come on! Could you have not just simply said morning glory? Even the dogs object. The flower seemed to quiver and then swayed gently to and fro. Suddenly, the painter appeared at the door of the studio and made staccato signs for them to come in. They turned to each other and smiled. "I am waiting," he cried. "Do come in. The light is quite perfect, and you can bring your drinks." They rose up and sauntered down the walk together. 2 green and white butterflies fluttered past them, and in the pear tree at the corner of the garden, a thrush began to sing. "You are glad to have met me, Mr. Gray," said Lord Henry, looking at him. "Yes, I am glad now. I wonder, shall I always be glad?" "Always? That is a dreadful word. It makes me shudder when I hear it. Women are so fond of using it. They spoil every romance by trying to make it last forever. It is a meaningless word, too. The only difference between a caprice and a lifelong passion is that the caprice lasts a little longer."
A caprice?
It's a caprice or caprice.
It's caprice, an impulsive change of mind, an inclination to change one's mind impulsively, a sudden, unpredictable action or change.
The root of capricious. Okay. All right. As they entered the studio, Dorian Gray put his hand upon Lord Henry's arm. "In that case, let our friendship be a caprice," he murmured, flushing at his own boldness. Then stepped up on the platform and resumed his pose. Lord Henry flung himself into a large wicker armchair and watched him. The sweep and dash of the brush on the canvas made the only sound that broke the stillness, except when now and then Hallward stepped back to look at his work from a distance. In the slanting beams that streamed through the open doorway, the dust danced and was golden. The heavy scent of the roses seemed to brood over everything. After about a quarter of an hour, Hallward stopped painting, looked for a long time at Dorian Gray, and then for a long time at the picture, biting the end of one of his huge brushes and frowning. "It is quite finished," he cried at last, and stooping down, he wrote his name in long vermilion letters on the left-hand corner of the canvas. Lord Henry came over and examined the picture. It was certainly a wonderful work of art, and a wonderful likeness as well. "My dear fellow, I congratulate you most warmly. he said. It is the finest portrait of modern times, Mr. Gray. Come over and look at it yourself. The lad started, as if awakened from some dream. Is it really finished? He murmured, stepping down from the platform. Quite finished, said the painter. And you have sat splendidly today. I am awfully obliged to you. That is entirely due to me, broke in Lord Henry. Isn't it, Mr. Gray? God, the ego!
Right? So much ego. Hubris. In Greek mythology, the heroes and people were punished by the gods most often for hubris.
Mm-hmm.
Since they've referenced Greek things many times in this chapter, I'm thinking that the hubris in this chapter is foreshadowing.
More than likely.
They are going to be punished for their arrogance.
God, I hope so.
So arrogant.
Dorian made no answer, but he passed listlessly in front of his picture and turned toward it. When he saw it, he drew back, and his cheeks flushed for a moment with pleasure. A look of joy came into his eyes, as if he had recognized himself for the first time. He stood there, motionless and in wonder, dimly conscious that Hallward was speaking to him, but not catching the meaning of his words. The sense of his own beauty came on him like a revelation. He had never felt it before. Basil Hallward's compliments had seemed to him to be merely the charming exaggerations of friendship. He had listened to them, laughed at them, forgotten them. They had not influenced his nature. Then had come Lord Henry Wotton, with his strange panegyric?
A formal composition intended as a public compliment.
Public speech or published text in praise of someone or something.
Elaborate praise or laudation.
Yep, okay. And then had come Lord Henry Wotton with his strange panegyric on youth, his terrible warning of its brevity that had stirred him at the time. And now, as he stood gazing at the shadow of his own loveliness, the full reality of the description flashed across him. Yes, there would be a day when his face would be wrinkled and wizened, his eyes dim and colorless, the grace of his figure broken and deformed. The scarlet would pass away from his lips, and the gold steal from his hair. The life that was to make his soul would mar his body. He would become dreadful, hideous, and uncouth. As he thought of it, a sharp pang of pain struck through him like a knife, and made each delicate fiber of his nature quiver. His eyes deepened into amethyst, and across them came a mist of tears. He felt as if a hand of ice had been laid upon his heart. "Don't you like it?" cried Hallward at last, stung a little by the lad's silence, not understanding what it meant. "Of course he likes it," said Lord Henry. "Who wouldn't like it? It is one of the greatest things in modern art. I will give you anything you like to ask for it. I must have it." "It is not my property, Harry." "Whose property is it?" "Dorian's, of course," answered the painter. "He is a very lucky fellow." "How sad it is," murmured Dorian Gray, with his eyes still fixed upon his own portrait. "How sad it is. I shall grow old and horrible and dreadful, but this picture will remain always young. It will never be older than this particular day of June. If it were only the other way. If it were I who was to be always young and the picture that was to grow old, for that I would give everything. Yes, there's nothing in the whole world I would not give. I would give my soul for that."
Oh, that's another story that we're going to have to do at some point. Story of Faust.
"Oh, yes. You would hardly care for such an arrangement, Basil," cried Lord Henry, laughing. "It would be rather hard lines on your work." "I should object very strongly, Harry," said Hallward. Dorian Gray turned and looked at him. "I believe you would, Basil. You like your art better than your friends. I am no more to you than a green bronze figure. Hardly as much, I dare say." The painter stared in amazement. It was so unlike Dorian to speak like that. What had happened? He seemed quite angry, his face was flushed and his cheeks burning. "Yes," he continued, "I am less to you than your ivory Hermes, or your silver fawn. You will like them always. How long will you like me? Till I have my first wrinkle, I suppose. I know now that when one loses one's good looks, whatever they may be, one loses everything. Your picture has taught me that. Lord Henry Wotton is perfectly right. Youth is the only thing worth having. When I find that I am growing old, I shall kill myself." Okay, back to Hermes, who is, of course, the messenger of the Greek gods. And the faun is, of course, a lusty Roman nature god with the lower body of a goat, also called a satyr in Greek mythology.
Yep. And the faun or satyr is what the Greek god Pan looks like. So in our Lit Bits episode, I mentioned Hermes and Pan.
Mm-hmm. Hallward turned pale and caught his hand. Dorian, Dorian, he cried, don't talk like that. I've never had such a friend as you, and I shall never have such another. You are not jealous of material things, are you? You who are finer than any of them. I am jealous of everything whose beauty does not die. I am jealous of the portrait you have painted of me. Why should it keep what I must lose? Every moment that passes takes something from me and gives something to it. Oh, if it were only the other way, if the picture could change, and I could be always what I am now. Why did you paint it? It will mock me someday, mock me horribly. The hot tears welled into his eyes. He tore his hand away, and flinging himself on the divan, he buried his face in the cushions, as though he were praying. Okay, we're going to pause here for a second, because he has just displayed the Disney princess, response to things happening you don't like.
Right? He is such a princess. It's kind of cute.
It is kind of cute.
He's like a princess version of Narcissus and Faust combined.
Oh, wouldn't you love to see Disney cover the portrait of Dorian Gray?
Disney can get dark.
Yes, it can. So we've got Dorian Gray, the princess.
Yes.
All right. This is your doing, Harry, said the painter bitterly. Lord Henry shrugged his shoulders. It is the real Dorian Gray, that is all. It is not. If it is not, what have I to do with it? You should have gone away when I asked you, he muttered. I stayed when you asked me, was Lord Henry's answer. Harry, I can't quarrel with my two best friends at once, but between you both, you have made me hate the finest piece of work I have ever done, and I will destroy it. What is it but canvas and color? I will not let it come across our three lives and mar them. Dorian Gray lifted his golden head from the pillow, and with pallid face and tear-stained eyes looked at him as he walked over to the deal, which is pine or fir wood, huh?
Over to the deal?
Right. And then the note with deal says pine or fir wood.
He walked over to the wood?
Let's finish the sentence.
Okay.
As he walked over to the deal painting table,
okay,
that was set beneath the high curtained window. So deal in this case means pine or fir wood painting table.
Okay.
His fingers were straying about among the litter of tin tubes and dry brushes, seeking for something. Yes, it was for the longest palette knife, with its thin blade of lithe steel. He had found it at last. He was going to rip up the canvas. With a stifled sob, the lad leapt from the couch, because I hate the word leaped.
Right.
Lad leapt from the couch, and rushing over to Hallward, tore the knife out of his hand, and flung it to the end of the studio. Don't, Basil, don't, he cried. It would be murder. I'm glad you appreciate my work at last, Dorian, said the painter coldly when he had recovered from his surprise. I never thought you would. Appreciate it? I'm in love with it. Basil, it is part of myself. I feel that. Well, as soon as you're dry, you shall be varnished and framed and sent home. Then you can do what you like with yourself. This is very much Narcissus.
Right.
And he walked across the room and rang the bell for tea. You will have tea, of course, Dorian. And so will you, Harry? Or do you object to such simple pleasure? I adore simple pleasures, said Lord Henry. They're the last refuge of the complex, but I don't like scenes, except on the stage. What absurd fellows you are, both of you. I wonder who it was defined man as a rational animal. Was the most premature definition ever given.
It was.
Man is many things, but he is not rational. I'm glad he's not, after all, though I wish you chaps would not squabble over the picture. You had much better let me have it, Basil. The silly boy doesn't really want it, and I really do. If you let anyone have it but me, Basil, I shall never forgive you, cried Dorian Gray, and I don't allow people to call me a silly boy. You know the picture is yours, Dorian. I gave it to you before it existed. And you know you have been a little silly, Mr. Gray, and that you don't really object to being reminded that you are extremely young. I should have objected very strongly this morning, Lord Henry. This morning. You have lived since then. There came a knock at the door, and the butler entered with a laden tea tray and set it down upon a small Japanese table. There was a rattle of cups and saucers, and the hissing of a fluted Georgian urn. The 2 globe-shaped china dishes were brought in by a page. Dorian Gray went over and poured out the tea. The 2 men sauntered languidly to the table and examined what was under the covers. Phrasing.
Right?
Let us go to the theater tonight, said Lord Henry. There is sure to be something on somewhere. I have promised to dine at White's, but it is only with an old friend. So I can send him a wire to say that I am ill, or that I am prevented from coming in consequence of a subsequent engagement. I think that would be a rather nice excuse. It would have all the surprise of candor. It is such a bore putting on one's dress clothes, muttered Hallward. And when one has them on, they're so horrid. Yes, answered Lord Henry dreamily. The costume of the 19th century is detestable. It is so somber, so depressing. Sin is the only real color element left in modern life. You really must not say things like that before Dorian, Harry. Before which Dorian? The one who's pouring out tea for us, or the one in the picture? Before either.
Now Dorian has a twin. It's great.
I should like to come to the theater with you, Lord Henry, said the lad. Then you shall come. And you will come too, Basil, won't you? I can't. Really, I would sooner not. I have a lot of work to do. Well, then you and I will go alone, Mr. Gray. I should like that awfully. The painter bit his lip and walked over, cup in hand, to the picture. I shall stay with the real Dorian, he said sadly.
Okay, then. This romance story has turned into a
quadrangle? Because, they all love the painting.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, goodness.
And there's 2 Dorians, and he's going to spend time with the real Dorian, which is the painting. What is he going to do with it?
I don't dare imagine.
1800s porn.
Come on. Marcus was basically graffitied on buildings in Rome. Big pictures at Vesuvius.
And Pompeii.
Mm-hmm. Well, Vesuvius, Pompeii.
And I think somewhere in Scandinavia or something, in a cave about 10 feet up, was a carving. And somebody finally got up there to read it. And it said, wow, it's high up here.
Yep. Thus illustrating, human nature has not changed much. Is it the real Dorian? Cried the original of the portrait, strolling across to him. Am I really like that? Yes, you are just like that. How wonderful, Basil. At least you are like it in appearance. But it will never alter, sighed Hallward. That is something. What a fuss people make about fidelity, exclaimed Lord Henry. Why, even in love, it is purely a question for physiology. That has nothing to do with our own will. Young men want to be faithful and are not. Old men want to be faithless and cannot. That is all one can say. Don't go to the theater tonight, Dorian, said Hallward. Stop and dine with me. I can't, Basil. Why? Because I've promised Lord Henry Wotton to go with him. He won't like you the better for keeping your promises. He always breaks his own. I beg you not to go. Dorian laughed and shook his head. I entreat you. The lad hesitated and looked over at Lord Henry, who was watching them from the tea table with an amused smile. I must go, Basil, he answered. Very well, said Hallward, and he went over and laid down his cup on the tray. It is rather late, and as you have to dress, you had better lose no time. Goodbye, Harry. Goodbye, Dorian. Come and see me soon. Come tomorrow. Certainly. You won't forget? No, of course not, cried Dorian. And Harry? Yes, Basil. Remember what I asked you when we were in the garden this morning? I've forgotten it. I trust you. I wish I could trust myself, said Lord Henry, laughing. Come, Mr. Gray. My hansom is outside, and I can drop you at your place. Goodbye, Basil. It's been a most interesting afternoon. As the door closed behind them, the painter flung himself down on the sofa, and a look of pain came into his face.
Aww.
And that is the end of this chapter.
Yeah, that was chapter 2 of Dorian Gray.
Yep.
I think Dorian and Basil broke up.
Yeah, I think so.
Dorian decided that he wanted to be with Henry because Henry makes him think.
Mm-hmm. Or maybe Dorian's just a little bit of a social climber.
Could be.
I don't know. We'll have to read more and find out.
But he did say that he had known Basil for months, and Basil didn't change him. But in just the space of a conversation, Henry did.
Yep.
I I like Henry. He's my favorite character so far.
Yeah. I haven't got a favorite character. I dislike Henry, I dislike Dorian, and I dislike Basil.
At least wise Henry tries to think things through, whereas the other two are extremely shallow, but they're all three narcissists, and I would want to punch each of them if I knew them personally.
I like the butler.
Yes, I like the butler. What was the butler's name?
We're having a moment here. Let me see. The butler is
Parker.
Yes, Parker. Actually, I like the bumblebee.
The bumblebee. I like the poison flowers.
The laburnum.
Yes.
What does it say of us that our favorite characters are basically non-entities?
Right.
That concludes Chapter 2 of A Portrait of Dorian Gray, a picture of Dorian Gray.
I do like portrait.
I do like Portrait better, but I cannot for the life of me remember that it is Gray and not Grey. And because there's someone's name, that's kind of important.
Right. You can't just say it's British, so it should be E.
Because the title is legitimately Gray.
Right. What did you think of this chapter?
It's starting to pick up a little bit.
There's less philosophizing.
But it's a little deeper.
Yeah.
The crap that Dorian has gotten himself into.
Right.
Yes, let's offer our soul for a painting to maintain my youth.
Because this guy I have a crush on, they just met, has pointed out that someday I'm gonna get old.
Uh-huh. You will watch everyone you love die, and you will stand unchanging. I have never understood the people who wish to live forever.
Right. I mean, I would like to stay young and healthy until I die, but I don't want to live forever. I want to, die at the age a normal person would die.
Yeah.
But I want to stay young and healthy until then. I'll, wake up one day when I'm 80 and be dead.
I'll just take healthy. I don't necessarily need you.
Well, if you're not young, then, your body kind of breaks down and you still be healthy. Like joint aches and arthritis. But if I didn't have any of that, I wouldn't mind being old.
I already got joint aches. Does that make me old?
You're like, what, 5 years away from 40?
Oh, you flatter me.
What tea would go good with Narcissus? I should look up Greek teas.
Haven't you already done that? There is actually a recommendation.
There is?
In our Facebook group. Mm-hmm.
When was this?
A while back when you asked about Greek teas.
Well, I check every day for half a week.
Oh, well, you could have a Narcissus tea.
Great, but I don't have it.
Right. And oh my god, it's expensive for a 4-ounce tin. $36.
Shepherd's tea.
Mm-hmm.
What is shepherd's tea?
So, a Narcissus tea is an oolong tea, and I'm not sure how you feel about oolong.
I can't remember if I like oolong or not. I remember having it, but I can't remember I liked it.
That ends Chapter 2 of A Picture of Dorian Gray. We will see you or talk to you, as it may be, in our next podcast.
Bye.
Bye.
Love you.
What she said?
Ditto.
Bye. The purge is real. It comes out of my ass. So, shall we get back to recording Chapter 2 now that the purge has ended?
Brindle likes to curl up in my lumbar. Except he's not adding in big breasts.
Right? Heaving bosoms. You do realize, should we come across their discussion of the chest of Dorian Gray at some point, we're probably going to end up in fits of giggles.